Well, good Thursday evening to you folks. How are you doing tonight? I hope everybody's doing exceptionally well. I am your humble, happy, hairy host, the Dungeon Delver, Bill Silly. Y'all know who I am. Y'all know what we do. You know, if you're a fan of Clue, here's one for you. Who killed boredom in Lake Geneva using a role-playing game? Well, lots of people's fingerprints are on the implement. And so with that said, let me welcome in one of those engineers of classic role-playing games, Mr. Steve Marsh. Steve, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Good to see you. Thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So, yeah, you pretty much got your finger in every role-playing game pie out there when it comes to classic D&D, and it's pretty darn wonderful. But the question I have for you, just right off the bat, how do you properly pronounce Sahuagin? Sahuagin. Okay. All right.
Okay. What you need to understand is I didn't read like a normal person or learn how to spell until law school. I used to read words as glyphs instead of phonetically.
Okay.
And so Ixit because I skipped a syllable.
Ixit. Okay.
And Sahagwin because, well, it's actually named, Ixit is the name of a historian, and so is Sahagwin.
Okay.
They're both Mesoamerican historians.
All right. So the Ixit always sounded Mesoamerican to me, but Sahuagin, I just, for
Spanish.
years, Finnish. Okay.
Spanish.
Spanish. I'm sorry. A little muffled there on the headphone. Yeah, for years, poring over the monster manual, and what an entry in the monster manual for the Sahuagin. There's like a whole adventure right there just packed into their description. I love it because you've got their entire society laid out, everything. It's fantastic. One of my favorite monsters to show at players who are just expecting orcs, goblins, and hobgoblins. So you were really there from the get-go at TSR. How we heard so many stories of, I just bumped into this person at a con, or I wrote a letter to the Strategic Review or Dragon Magazine. What's your exogenesis? How did you start at TSR back in the day?
Well, my first exposure to Dungeons and Dragons, I sat down next to Sandy Peterson in the class.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know him, but he and his friend Brian Stout had the rule books and asked if I could borrow one because they look really neat. And then I started corresponding with Gary. Now, in print, Gary kept post-dating me to 1973. But we didn't make contact till 1974.
Okay.
The same thing would happen with Greg Stafford. Greg Stafford would start post-dating me earlier than we actually met.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll have people giving me credit for being involved in things before I actually met them. And that happens in a lot of different, I was involved with some Chaosium products. I was involved with a little bit of Fantasy Hero when it first came out and some other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see people giving me credit for being involved before I actually was, oftentimes. They just kind of post-date me, which is, I guess, better than the other thing. But anyway, so I wrote Gary. He wrote me back. We started corresponding. I started sending him stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It started showing up in print. So, Cthulhu, which are from a medieval bestiary, they show up in Strategic Review. I added Good and Evil in, and of all things, they give me contributing editor credit for the issue of Strategic Review where Good and Evil show up on the Law Chaos.
Okay.
Which is, a lot of times you get editor credits for when you wrote stuff, which is, just the way they did it.
Right.
And I got invited to come out and work there for a summer. So I came out over the summer of 1980. A lot of sources will put that down as 1979.
Mm-hmm.
But it really was 1980. It's a year later. And I was going to go to work for TSR after law school. And the Blooms wrote me a letter and basically told me that TSR had never actually offered me a job, which they had. And if somehow someone made that terrible mistake, I was obviously not the kind of person they would ever hire. And so I found a different job in the last part of my first year of law school. I mean, my third year of law school.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just left a clerkship where they were trying to transition me to working full-time after law school. So the Blooms had really bad timing as far as my life went.
Mm.
And someone said, well, you won too much money. I said, well, I wanted $7.50 an hour.
Yeah, I've the Blooms seem kind of synonymous with bad timing from back in the day, or just bad as an adjective in general.
They were preparing for a struggle with Gary Gygax, and they wanted to get rid of people or block people who were very loyal to him.
Mm.
And they perceived me as very loyal to Gary, which would be true. And so they didn't want me around.
Man, anyway.
But the summer I was in there, I got to write the expert set. And I got to write it because everybody else was busy doing things they enjoyed more, felt were more important.
But still, I mean, the basic and expert sets, that I've got the shirt. You know, that was the gateway for so many people. Even if they later played AD&D, that was like the door, and a lot of people just still cherish basic and expert. I think it's a fine D&D set.
Now with expert, the really hard work was Zeb Cook got stuck editing it.
Mm-hmm.
I need to realize he did not have computer word processing. He had to edit that sucker from scratch, from typewritten double space typewritten entries, and then make it match page for page with the basic set on a really short deadline. If you had asked me, and nobody did, I'd told you that was impossible, but he got it done anyway. But Zeb was pretty good at doing impossible things.
Oh yeah. That like I said, the basic and expert stuff just shines, and you guys put a high degree of polish on it. And you're talking about a time, you talk about layout. If you realized, hey, we really need a paragraph in here that better describes this. Nowadays, it's highlight, copy, paste, boom, in it goes. Back then, it was quite literally stop the presses.
Yeah, and now I got overruled on two things. Okay. One, I wanted the woolly mammoths to be intelligent because I wanted them to be heavy cavalry.
Okay.
And think about what it'd be like to have woolly mammoths as heavy cavalry, intelligent units. I thought it'd be a great thing.
I love it.
And there's a picture Errol Otis did of a woolly mammoth sitting in an overstuffed chair with a pipe, which I should have swiped. It was on the door. And they decided to cut that. I wanted to have step reductions for vampires. So you cut off a vampire's head, it knocks down off, let's say, 4 hit dice. You stake a vampire, it knocks 8 hit dice off. You bury them at a crossroads, it knocks another 4 hit dice off.
Mm-hmm.
So different levels of vampire need additional work to make sure they stay dead. Because you've got to do things that reduce their total hit dice to 0. And that
Excellent.
was
So it's
they decided that was too complicated. And then the last thing is there were supposed to be 20 hit dice sea monsters, sea serpents,
okay.
that were also casting spells like a 20th level magic user. They decided to reserve that for later book.
Mm.
And that never happened. But out there somewhere, there are 20 hit dice sea serpents that cast spells.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. If you want to run a true Martian experience in your basic expert game, you need spellcasting sea monsters, intelligent woolly mammoths, and granular vampires.
But I like granular stuff. You can see that from the SOG one.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, again, just your write up for the SOG one is, like I said, it's an adventure unto itself. Just there's so many monster entries that they're good monsters, but they're a little lean on the ground as far as description. But you've got a whole realm there for a dungeon master to just say, I'm just going to take this and drop it in my adventure, and there you go.
And the Ix and Chittle were, another one that were granular. They were more granular when they were written up. There was the anticipation of another character class called Philosophers that never surfaced.
Hmm.
And that's why they're referred to as Philosopher Such.
Oh, okay. Well, then I gotta ask, what was the philosopher class to be like?
It was going to have a very limited spell point system. You got 1 point per level. So a third level character had 3 spell points. And every level of spell cost a spell point to cast. So a third level character could cast like 3 sleep spells or 1 fireball.
Okay.
And you learned a very limited number of spells. And it was a limited granular system that let you have spell points, but nobody really wanted to play it. Because a classic character was more powerful.
Mm.
You got flexibility, but flexibility at the expense of raw power.
Okay. Did it use the staggered spell ability tables, like in AD&D at second level? A magic user can cast 2 first level spells. He doesn't get his second level spell until 3rd level, and he can't cast 3rd level spells until 5th level, and so on. Or was it just a more linear approach?
It was straight. You got your point, and you could spend it however you wanted.
Okay.
But on the other hand, a 6th level character's got 6 levels of spells they can cast.
Mm-hmm.
And 6 spell points. So that might be 1 detect magic, 1 sleep spell, 1 magic missile, 1 fireball.
Right. Or they might just all want to throw it into a 6th level spell. I'm drawing a blank. I can't think of any 6th level spells.
But in order to get that 6th level spell, you would have had to make it to level 6 without getting any spells.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, they were very limited in the number of spells they got and what they could cast with it. But it made for a great NPC class.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting NPC classes from back in the day that had a lot of flexibility. I was always fond of the witch myself, but that's for another time. I have a question here from a viewer who I don't think if you're in the audience, Sapphire Steel, you can say hi. I'm going to ask your question of Steve now. What is your favorite game elements scenario event? I guess that's a 3-parter there.
I like when it's possible to have multiple ways to get to quote unquote win a scenario. And that doesn't always happen.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, I did one for basic role playing. It was at last year's North Texas RPG Con.
Mm-hmm.
And you could stealth your way through it, you could fight your way through it, or you could talk your way through it. And all the resolutions were plausible. It's hard to make something like that happen that's plausible.
Mm-hmm.
But no matter which approach you took, they all made sense.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, I think we as dungeon masters, I think, get a little myopic and a little too wedded to insert sword into monster. And experience points fall out, but
it sure is a lot easier.
Yeah, it is. It is.
The number of times I've been able to successfully design something you could stealth through that you could also do other things was like 2.
Mm-hmm.
The same for being able to talk your way out of maybe 2 or 3. Whereas it's really easy to design stuff where people fight their way out.
It is. It is. I mean, Gandalf didn't have much conversation with the Balrog. Issued his challenge and then down into the abyss, both of them. Okay, so I get the next part of the question. Let's see here. If you could change any game dynamic, what would it be?
I think the different dynamics make a big difference. I think they make the various editions much more playable. I'm not sure I'd change much. Now, one thing that comes close is the design. I like to design sandboxes that have a scenario running through them,
mm-hmm.
so that they're reusable. For example, I did one where the characters go into the plane of ice, and there's, you can reuse that for the plane of ice a whole bunch of different ways. It's got all the random tables, all the terrain types, all the monsters.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing, for this North Texas RPG Con, my AD&D scenario, while it doesn't really touch on the plane of fire, it just gets in the borderlands. What can I say? It's got the rules for the entire plane of fire and a bunch of monsters for it, which is excess. But it makes for fun. Something I've done a variety of is how many of your encounters in a scenario should be random, and then how random should they be? For example, let's say you do an overland that takes you to a dungeon,
mm-hmm.
something similar. Should your encounters on the way there be drawn from a random table? Should they be fixed encounters that are randomly encountered, or should they just be fixed encounters? Now, the sandbox approach, and a path through a sandbox, it's kind of fun to do a complete encounter chart with a whole bunch of stuff, and then you roll to see what they meet, right?
Right.
However, if they get really lucky, they get the weakest encounters all the way through. If they get excessively lucky, the module turns out, or the adventure turns out to be too easy. I've also done stuff where all the encounters are fixed, and that makes for a much more controlled play style.
Mm.
And people tend to find that more challenging and more fun. When I did the plane of shadow materials, that's what I did for the adventure. That runs you into the plane of shadow and through things. Okay. While there are random encounter tables and monsters and terrains, what the player characters ran into were fixed encounters. so that, at this point they're going to run to this, and it controlled the difficulty level much better. And then the other way is, let's say you have 6 fixed encounters, but you can randomize which order the players encounter them in.
Mm-hmm.
So they're rolling for their encounters, but they're going to get 1 through 6. All that changes is the order they encounter them. And
Right.
I go back and forth which approach I use. The completely random makes for much better sandbox usability.
Mm-hmm.
The completely fixed makes for much better play, I think. And then you just put random encounters on the side. And I've played with all 3. And I'm actually working on that right now. And I won't say which ones I'm using. I've got a BX scenario, an AD&D scenario, and a basic role-playing scenario. And I'm not going to tell you what's using what, but because obviously this gets out before the con. And
right. Well, no spoilers, con goers. Sorry, you're not going to get it from this show. I myself am dying to know, but I will honor your desire to spring surprises on unsuspecting treasure grubbers.
And all I can say is that the basic expert scenario has been play tested. I ran it last year at ShireCon, and they completed it without all getting killed. So I know it's possible. It's also possible to screw up, but that's the way things go sometimes.
So speaking of encounters, there's a tack that I take that really, I think it saves a lot of work for the DM, and I'd like your opinion on this. And that is, frequently, like I have a Monday night group. It's got 12 people in it.
Yeah.
And they frequently go from the city of Greyhawk to various locations. And as you know, that if you take teleportation or the friendly eagle that's willing to bear you, that sort of thing out of the equation, you're looking at weeks or months of journey across land. I love to populate hexes along the way when I know more or less what track they're going to take. But I will create a travel journal well beforehand and roll the random encounters like the week before they take off. And then if we play for 5 or 6 weeks after that, I've already got everything. So it is random, but it's not truly random because it's not right there when it happens. But there's just times when you roll up, okay, there's 18 ogres, roll percentile dice. Oh, they're in lair. Now I have to have an abandoned village or a castle or a haunted wood or a cave or something like that to put the ogres in. So I just find that it's more convenient to have the random encounters done beforehand. But do you think that robs it of its spontaneity, or is it just smart bookkeeping?
I think it's the perfect approach. When you look at the random dungeons, they advise you to roll them up in advance. So you weren't rolling the random dungeon at the table, but it was still a random dungeon.
Sure. I mean, because, nobody wants to see this for 10 minutes. Hang on a second, guys. Hang on. I got to,
Yes.
They want stuff to be happening. So, yeah, that's just kind of a tack I take when it comes to random encounters. And I love it when modules, whether it's something, out of TSR or some other avenue, they have those wonderful pre-generated encounter tables you were talking about. There's 6 possibilities that a party could bump into on the first level, and everything's all nice, neat, laid out there. All I have to do is roll a d6.
Yes.
Which can lead to some... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I very much like that.
I mean, it can lead to some funny and frustrating results. I mean, the odds of if we're talking about a D6 rolling a 3 times in a row, it's ghouls again, guys. Sorry.
Or what you can do is you can cross off when they have the encounter and just roll till you get one that's left.
That's true. That's very true.
When you get all 6 of the encounters, you're just controlling, or assuming they get 6 random encounters, but you're controlling the order.
Mm-hmm.
I have decided that also rolling randomly for the times they don't have encounters can lead to excessive numbers of non-encounters if people get really lucky. It can make things a little bit too easy.
Mm.
Just like if, they get nothing but encounters and they don't get any of the non-encounter rolls, it can make it kind of hard.
Yeah.
So I think adding the non-encounters to that matrix, let's say you have 6 encounters and 6 non-encounters, roll a d12, mark that one off, and then next time roll for one that's left. That sort of thing works better.
I like that. I like that idea a lot, actually. I've run into situations. I have my own mega dungeon that I've loosed my players on, or loosed on my players, depending on which perspective you want to take. And I found that when they go in, it's like they might go in and bump into, a wandering band of 7 to 12 kobolds. And if they're a low level party, they have a really bad time. And that ends the adventuring day 25 feet into the dungeon. They got to turn around, drag their injured henchmen and wounded characters out, go back to the camp, light a fire, take a nap, cast some healing spells, and hope they have better luck next time. So I like the idea of null encounters. That's a bit of genius. I do like that. Another question from Sapphire Steel here. Do you see a future opportunity to expand the world into new directions, either with or without today's sociological evolutions from when it was first developed? Being role-playing games, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And there's a lot of development going on in the game space. I've been impressed by, at the con, at NTRPG Con, they have an award they give out called the Three Castles Award.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the small press amateur stuff. But the level of polish and quality it's as good as anything out there. And oftentimes they take things in much different directions. In fact, that's one of the metrics for judging it. And it's impressive at just how polished and how, the guy coming in last on the ratings will have a product that's equal to anything that is out there by most professionals or most large companies. It's impressive just how much is going on and how much evolution is going on. And that's been something that's gotten stronger over the years. But it's really impressive, just the quality.
Yeah, I was discussing this last night with the audience a bit, and the night before. We're at an age now. I mean, there's more pre-press publishing power in this computer that somebody threw away. Basically, the computer that I'm streaming on right now was thrown away, and somebody rescued it and gave it to me. I've got more power here than existed in the world as far as computing power in the 1980s. there's no reason to not do it oneself these days. And you can put together anything as well. Potentially, the potential exists to put together something as good as what was done back in the day, which cost thousands of dollars to lay out and do pre-press and all that.
I mean, to give you an example, in 1972, I graduated high school in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
We had a computer at the high school. It cost $360,000. Okay.
Okay.
In 1975, when I started my econ program in college, I switched majors. I had a TI calculator that cost less than $100 that was more powerful. And, I look at what computers were like just 10 years ago. And you're right, stuff people are throwing out right now is so much more powerful than what was available in the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Heck, even in 2010.
Yeah.
And, the layout, the tools available as well. It's very impressive.
Of course, the creativity has to be there, but I think that hurdle, as I was saying the other night when I was talking about doing it oneself, back in the 80s, even into the 90s, people think of the 90s as a golden era of computing. I mean, really back then, distributing your own adventure was, you could maybe get it out onto a handful of bulletin boards or upload it to an FTP site that only another propeller head would really know how to get their hands on. And I say that as a propeller head, that I don't mean that by way of insult. But now it's so, and it's got to be, from your perspective, it's got to be very exciting to see all these opportunities open up and for people to be able to produce some fantastic stuff for tabletop. I guess yourself included. What you've got some new products out, yeah?
Yeah, and I was going to say the big bottleneck is editing. Getting a good editor is by far the most difficult, valuable thing right now. And it's the one thing a computer can't do for you. And I've got an editor. I really like his style.
Mm-hmm.
We've had some delays, but life happens. I mean, most of my life has been delays in gaming. Ever since, Gary Gygax started advertising My Planes of Reality, and then they never quite showed up because he lost control of the company.
Yeah.
But it looks like, I've got stuff on the Dreamlands, on Shadow, on Ice. This con will have fire. And my editor's working with a publisher and revamping and reworking stuff. And so I expect to see things come out.
That's exciting. That's awesome here. I love it that, again, to go back to the opportunities that are being created now, there's so many things. I've talked to Jim Ward, some of the artist folks from TSR. I'm good friends with Tracy Lesh from back in the day at TSR. And there's so many little things they did back in the day that just sat in a folder because it's like, well, this can never get released. But now, the chances are out there, and I'm looking forward to seeing your planes. I read about those, when I was just little hints and stuff back in the day. So that's exciting, man.
Originally, I was going to do with TSR and then Judges Guild, and then they folded up right about the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gary started another company, and that kind of got blown up by external litigation. He got grossly overcharged on attorney's fees.
Yeah.
But that's life. So looks like this time maybe it'll happen, and
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed, man. I'm looking forward to it. I'm pretty excited about that. Chris had a question. And he says, do you have your own appendix? And of course, referring to the inspirational reading in the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide that expired your take on gaming, like Gary's in the DMG.
Well, first off, Gary and I shared some things. For example, 3 Hearts and 3 Lions.
One of my favorite fantasy books. I love that one.
We both read that. We both liked it. Gary based his alignment system off that, where law is ordered domestic and chaos is feral. And that's why you could have wild animals could have an alignment. Whereas nowadays, everybody makes them alignment free.
Right.
They would fit in a spectrum. I had a copy, back in the day. Now, you got to remember, back in the day, there weren't as many fantasy books. You get a couple, 3 a year. And now 5 or 6 a day are being published.
Wow.
In print, not to mention the stuff online. So that's a big difference. You might get one Elric book one book by Moorcock every 2-3 years. And sometimes authors were kind of funny. You've read Elric and Stormbringer, Stealer of Souls and Stormbringer.
Oh yeah.
Which I read them both back in like 71, 72. But when Moorcock first wrote that, he thought his editor wanted a Conan clone. Now that was Michael Moorcock's take at cloning Conan.
Okay.
Which is like, what?
It is.
I really liked the other character, and then his editor got back and this is great. This is exactly what I wanted. Something different from Conan. Back around 68, 67, I came across a Lancer Howard, Conan book. Someone had tossed in the trash in the J.C. Penney parking lot in Anchorage, Alaska. I dished it out of the trash and took it home. And that's how I ran into Conan and Howard.
Wow.
Let's see. I liked both 3 Hearts and 3 Lions and Shattered Sword, which are radically different novels by Paul Anderson.
Oh yeah. I mean, one is 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, and the other is a Viking saga. I mean, in the tragic sense as a Viking saga.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, guys, if you haven't read it, nothing good happens in Broken Sword. Nobody has a happy ending in Broken Sword.
But it's a very dramatic and powerful book.
It is.
And I also read, about 65, 66, because 66, Paul Anderson was part of the Roman Life and Times series, which were historical fiction written for kids to go over what the Romans were like.
Really?
Yeah, and so you have the story of a guy who's a Roman soldier in England. And of course, like all good Roman soldiers, he's looking for an opportunity to bathe every day. Which the Romans were unique that way in the ancient world. And he's carrying his part of the Roman fort on his shoulder. Everybody in the camp had 2 stakes and some other stuff strapped to a pole. They marched with it over their shoulders. And it was accurate historical fiction. It was kind of there was a lot of interesting stuff of that sort. I read a lot of Andre Norden.
Mm-hmm.
Who, for the longest time, she was just kind of ignored.
She wrote the first ever Dungeons and Dragons novel, Quag Keep.
Yes. It's the only thing she wrote that wasn't good.
It's quirky fun. It's not awful. I've read worse.
But have you finished worse?
No.
And I liked her Witch World books.
Mm-hmm.
Did a lot of crossover. Something that went on in the late 50s and early 60s was that editors believed that fantasy wouldn't sell. And so you had science fiction that was really fantasy. Instead of a tramp steamer going ashore in Africa and having a fantasy encounter, you had a tramp starship that went ashore at some planet and they had psionics. Bradley's Darkover was a fantasy world, but of course it's all psionics because psionics was science fiction.
Mm-hmm. And
there was a fair amount of that kind of writing. I like Gerald of Jure, and I have Eaters of the Undead as an NPC character class because they make a fun monster.
Right.
Player characters have to go around eating undead creatures. I'm not sure how good of a campaign that would make. But as a random encounter, which may or may not turn into combat, it's kind of interesting and quirky.
It is.
Let's see. So I like Kornbluth. I liked Anderson, Andre Norden, Roger Zelazny. When I was in 5th grade, I got a first edition set of paperbacks for Lord of the Rings. I had a teacher that always wanted to meet some kid who just learned because they like learning. Never occurred to her what would happen to someone that liked that, was approach things like that, how they treated things they weren't interested in. So she talked with my parents, and it was real simple. I could get the next book if I did homework and studied. Basically blackmail. And so I took home the Lord of the Rings series, Men, Martians, and Machines from Russell, which was early science fiction, and Letters from the Earth by Mark Twain, which was Mark Twain's most sarcastic and depressed writing.
Mm.
He had stipulated it was not to be released until at least 20 years after his death. Which for a kid in 5th grade, and I was a year ahead in school, so I was, the age of a 4th grader, it was a little bit,
Yeah.
But
I read 1984 in 5th grade, so yeah, I
and then I read the 2-volume set of The Golden Bough, which later he expanded to 30 volumes, which seems excessive to me. I didn't read that. But I was trying to do a magic system. And in 68, I just couldn't do it. But one thing that Gary Gygax came up with is magic as artillery.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early rules, it's very obvious. Lightning bolts shoot like trebuchets. Fireballs use the template for catapults. I mean, it's real straightforward. These are, they're even using the wargaming templates for the various artillery types.
Yeah. We actually, Paul Stormberg and I played Chainmail in a live stream a few months ago, and he pointed that very thing out. So that cements it there.
And when you have magic as artillery, it's really, suddenly it's much easier to design. And you can base other spells off, the equivalent power or impact.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a dramatic thing because suddenly you could have a magic system that worked well. And they talk about fancy in magic, but if you've read the books, nobody has more than 5 spells. And most people only have 3 or 4.
Yeah, a couple of Vance's stories, very high-level wizards going on extreme missions of daring do will memorize 3 spells.
Yeah, and they've got equipment, and that's, I still have the one Conan book, yes. The rest of them I gave away.
Okay. Well, there you have your answer. The rescued book is still safe, Daniel.
I used to have thousands of volumes of books. And I eventually gave away a lot of them.
Mm.
A couple thousand religion books, thousands of paperbacks. I discovered that on Amazon, I could get stuff. And so I didn't need to keep a physical copy in order to have one available if I decided I wanted to read it again.
Mm.
The Lord of the Rings volumes, they got trashed by my brother. But they were just first edition, first printing paperbacks.
Oof. Oh, that causes me physical discomfort, Steve. That is like actually hurting me. I can only imagine how you feel about that.
Well, I've gotten over it. I've had, 20 years to get over it.
But do you have a wood grain OD&D set?
I had Paul Stormberg sell it.
I
had a bunch of papers, including my Planes of Reality stuff and a bunch of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
My wife finally said, Steve, you've carried those around too long. You need to throw them away. And the same week I had agreed to get rid of them, Grow Dog.
Alan Grohe, yeah.
Yeah, he contacted me and I said, hey, would you like these? And he said, yes, but you ought to send them to Paul Stormberg and have Paul sell them. So I thought, okay, they'll go to someone that wants them. And sure enough, they did. Paul got some criticism from some people, most of them who wished they were the ones that had bought stuff instead of somebody else.
Yeah.
But, it was just a mess of papers. He got it sorted out. He did an excellent job. And some of the stuff, other people gave it more credit than I did. For example, Sandy Peterson said, hey, yeah, that particular product, that was the original rules upon which Call of Cthulhu were based. Which I wouldn't have said that. In fact, I didn't say that. But he said it 2 days after the auction closed. So people start contacting the guy that bought it. Well, that's fine. He paid $70 for it and people got into the thousands until I said, guys, I collect Ferraris. I'm framing this in the entryway of my house. Unless you're going to pay me enough money to buy a couple of new Ferraris, I'm really not interested. This is my favorite collectible. Then he contacts me because he's feeling bad. He didn't pay that much. And of course, he could pay a lot more. Mm-hmm. And I told him, well, if you really feel I need to pay me more, send me $5. Because when I said it's okay, the guy goes, no. So I said, but I found that if I tell someone, if you really feel you need to send me money, send me $5. And invariably when I do that, people don't send me any money. Though I'd be glad to get the $5. It's off of an old joke. The guys from Second City Radio who did Take Off from the Great White North.
Bob and Doug McKenzie, yeah.
On the extended cut, you find out they actually had a professional guitarist.
Mm-hmm.
And he cuts in, and we paid him. He says, "Yeah, they paid me $5, and $5 is $5."
$5 is $5. That's right.
If somebody, but I find that if I tell someone nothing, they're not happy. But if I tell them $5, they go, "Okay," and then they don't send me anything because they figure, well, he's only asking for $5. He really does mean it.
Steve, I promise you, if I ever buy anything from you, I will send you $5 more than the asking price. You will get your $5 from me. If I ever purchase anything from you, if it's something from a third-party publisher and you get a $5 bill in the mail, that's from me.
I'll remember that.
Well,
but I was glad the guy valued it. What I wanted was the stuff to go to people who valued it,
mm-hmm.
who would make them happy. And, it made him happy. He framed it in the way of his house. It's like, that's a win for me. So I would have liked the $5. But obviously, he's contacted me about offering me thousands, and I'm turning him down because I thought what I got was fair. And he got the point. So we were good.
Well, that's awesome. That is great. I hate to keep picking on Tracy, but he lives here in town with me, so I got to do this. So if you're watching, Tracy, I'm picking on you again. But yeah, he told the story of going over to meet Gary when he was a teenager, and Heidi Gygax saw the doodles he was putting in his notebook, and she said, "Hey, can I show your notebook to my dad?" And then Gary called him up and said, "Do you want to work for me, kid?" And he got when he went over there, Gary tossed him a wood grain AD&D set and said, "Here, take this and read through it and tell me what you think." And so one of the first questions I asked him when I met him was, "You still have the wood grain set?" And he said, "No, I don't." It went away a long time ago, so I commiserated. But so you're doing cons, obviously. What's your what? And I guess do you have been all along? But do you have a favorite convention story? Like what is a no kidding? There I was con gaming story.
Okay, first off, I've done ShareCon once. I've done AppleCon once, and I try to get out every year to North Texas RPG Con.
Okay.
And the one year I missed it, I had somebody else run my event for me. So I don't do a lot of cons. I have had a couple people invite me to attend a con. They just wanted me to pay to attend and charge me a bunch of other stuff. It's like, I don't mind attending a con, but I don't want to pay a premium just to show up to one.
Yeah.
But, now fun things that have happened at North Texas RPG Con is I've taken people out for lunch or dinner.
Mm-hmm.
At North Texas, guests of honor take you out to dinner. And I had a guy who, bless his heart, he came up all the way from South America without registering for any events.
Oh.
And so there he is at the con. He spent a lot of time and money to make it, but he didn't understand the registration system. And luckily, I was able to get him in my BX game, and that's his favorite system.
Excellent.
So we just made an extra seat at the table for him. I always have more pre-gens. We have spots to create some variety. And I've got an ongoing campaign that runs only at the convention.
Oh, very cool.
Yes, I've got two of them. One's my BX, and the other's the AD&D campaign.
Mm-hmm.
They both run only at the convention. And so the characters are the same characters year after year, with the same extras too.
Mm-hmm.
And their magic items and other things change up every year.
Okay.
And they have the same NPCs, and it's kind of fun. One of the NPCs is modeled off of Bill Meinhardt with permission, and that's been fun. Odds are this may be the last time because he came in after several adventures, and this is probably the last one where he's going to be involved sending people out on adventures.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually an NPC quest giver.
Nice.
And that's been fun. But from early on, Bill was interested in my stuff, and so I made an effort to always make a copy of everything I'm doing, so he gets one. And when I run the adventures at the con, people that participate in my games get a copy of the adventure we ran.
Okay.
And, they're often between 30 and 60 pages long. There's a lot of material there.
Right.
And that's been kind of fun just to have those. And I usually will donate a copy of it to the con, and they auction it off.
Okay. Ever any thoughts given to going to GaryCon?
Yeah. If I can get an invitation. I'm cheap. I'm retired. I do a lot of backpacking. My wife and I finished up the Appalachian Trail.
Wow.
We're going to start the PCT and try and through hike it this year. And we start right after NTRPG Con. Can't miss
that's a stretch of the legs.
I made AppleCon because we were hiking through Maine at the time.
Nice.
And they offered to come pick me up. I looked at the distance. I said, well, gee, that's rough. So my wife and I, we rented a car, drove down, attended, and drove back. It seemed like it was too hard to have them pick me up. And then SharCon, again, we're backpacking through that part of the world. And right at the same time the con's running, and the year
that's very clever. I like that.
And
how do you want to go backpacking?
one other con I've attended, which is in Winchester, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a small con put on by a group of friends and family. So, but I got to play in the Aliens role-playing game, and that was great.
That's the new one from Free League?
I think it's first off, everybody playing has a different agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a mechanic that's similar to sanity, a stress mechanic. Whereas your stress builds up, you get worse and worse at things. But the guy that DM'd it, he had music and handouts. It was just really a beautiful job.
Excellent. Are you a big user of miniatures and terrain on the tabletop?
I'm a big user of pennies and Sharpie, and not Sharpies, but the kind, the dry erase markers.
Yeah, the dry erase, yeah.
And I have maps and stuff, but I find that if I make people draw and we do stuff, aside from the theater of the mind aspects, I also give away a lot less information.
Right on.
Those beautiful tables, every secret door in the dungeon is obvious.
Well, I use I can't really travel to long distance cons just because it's not in shot, but I've got a 3 foot deep, 2 foot high shelf that runs the entire length of this room. that's full of beautiful pieces of Dwarven Forge in boxes.
Oh yeah.
But I cover up holes that the party hasn't seen. I'll lay out flat cloths, but I get it completely, especially at a convention setting. I mean, dragging 500 pounds of minis and terrain and stuff, and then setting it up and trying to keep prying eyes away. That's half your time at the con right there, just trying to police that. So
Now, I've often had props.
mm-hmm.
You know, for example, so I'll hand out a bunch of props and have people pick them, and then they find out what the props do.
Oh, that's neat.
So yeah, and and then they get to keep the props.
Very cool. I like that. I like that.
I've had sword-shaped flash drives.
Oh, cool.
Flash drives and funny dice. And I've had a few miniatures I've given away. And gee, what else? Oh, one year I gave all the other guests of honor a sword.
Man, I've got to get to wherever you're running a game and get into it. A sword and a flash drive. I am there.
And then I gave Bad Mike a real, I mean, there are a bunch of variety in the swords, okay, including some wasters and stuff. But Bad Mike got a real sword. He got a real broadsword.
Nice. That is very cool.
And one year off con, I took a bunch of 2-liter bottles, filled them with water, and had people, hit them with swords.
Oh, very cool.
Well, people discover that even if they're hitting a sword by, they're hitting that bottle by surprise from behind, it's not always as easy as it looks. But the other thing that's interesting is if you let them thrust, and I have a little safety thing that goes on with a real thrusting sword, because you thrust at a bottle, and most of the time you penetrate 18 inches or more through the bottle further than you expect it to go.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, the worst thing that happens with the sword is someone slips, it goes flying off in the distance. So you have to have an arc that's clear of people.
Right.
And then a lot of times, if you don't hit your bottle correctly, it goes flying like you hit it with a baseball bat instead of being cut. Now, if you hit it right, it cuts through like there's nothing there. And some types of swords cut much better than others. But thrusting, my gosh, everybody thrusting goes right through things. And the big safety thing is, with a sword that's made for thrusting versus one that's not, like a proper rapier, like my oldest daughter owns, which I made the mistake of giving to her. It penetrates a good 12 to 18 inches further than you're planning on, even when you're familiar with it. It does something I call pulling a thrust. It just goes right down the line. Where you have a cut and thrust sword, and it thrusts about as far as you expect it to go. There's just a dramatic difference between the two kinds. And some of the more interesting accidents involving Vikings involve people getting stabbed by accident. People rarely got hacked by accident or sliced by accident, but every so often somebody got stabbed by accident. And those migration era blades, the Viking swords, people weren't really thinking stabbing. They weren't really stabbing weapons in spite of but you know what? They work really well at stabbing weapons, especially by accident.
When it comes to stabbing accidents, I've put some X-Acto blades through my fingers before, but that's about it.
You know what I'm talking about, how easy it is to stab yourself with one.
Oh yeah. Just I'm going to take a little flash off this miniature. Oh, that's interesting. Let me go get a bandage.
Oh, that reminds me of another of my favorite books was Njal Saga. And the character that I found most interesting is that's a historical saga versus it's about a guy that got himself burned alive in his own home by people who had a feud with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a guy called Kari. And Kari escapes. The people that conspired managed to get him outlawed under questionable circumstances. And then there's only 60 of them. And after a while, they decide the only thing they can do is flee Iceland. Because Kari is too dangerous. And then he tracks a bunch of them down to the king of the Isle of Man.
Mm-hmm.
And they're telling stories and shading the truth. And he walks in and kills a couple of them at the guy's dinner table. And the king is like, Kari, you can't do that. You can't just murder my guests. And Kari looks around and says, okay, boys, you all know me. I guess I'm going to die here. But anybody willing to stand back to back and die with me? And amazingly, a couple guys volunteer. At which point, the rest of the guys aren't willing to fight with him. He's well, I'm going to take 10 or 12 of you down with me. Come on. Like, yeah. The king goes, Kari, you can't do this to me. And the king goes, you know what? If you leave right now, we'll call it quits, okay? And so Kari leaves, takes the guy with him. One of the most famous ambush scenes in the saga is some guys spot Kari like 12 miles off, 6 miles off. They go, oh no, we're being ambushed by Kari Ellertson. We've got to make a stand. Kari, not Ellertson's. That was a girl I knew. We got to make a stand. And I'm thinking, if Kari's after me, I'm not making a stand. I'm going to continue running. He may not catch me.
Yeah.
I make a stand, he'll catch up with me. And sure enough, he does. At that time period, there was much more equality in Iceland than later in the feudal period.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a guy, his wife's mad at him. A bunch of people are trying to murder him. He's up on top of the house holding him off with his bow and arrow. His bowstring breaks. The only bowstrings in the house belong to his wife, and she says, you can't have any.
Ah.
Tell me if I don't have one. She says, it's my property, and you can't have them, so there. He goes, woman, they'll remember you for this. But you notice he doesn't just take one of her bowstrings because it's not his property.
It's not his property.
He just, the only threat he's got is people remember you for this. And sure enough, he gets murdered and people remember her. And then she regrets it afterwards.
There you go, boys. Remember, keep a few extra bowstrings and don't ask your wife for theirs.
At least if she's mad at you.
Especially if she's mad at you. So I gotta jump back a little bit because this question has preyed on my mind, no pun intended. Are psionics your baby?
Okay, let me go over what happened with psionics.
Good.
Back before I left to do some church service, I was taking a mysticism class, and I thought, Indian mystics would make a good character class.
Okay.
And when you read this stuff in Eldritch Wizardry, you get all sorts of spillover from that. Chakras, major and minor disciplines, because there are 8 major chakras, and they're all associated with specific powers. Then there are all the other things that people show up with. And so I did a character class called the Mystic.
Okay.
At the same time, someone was trying to do a psionic character class called Divines. They had offense and defensive powers. And they couldn't make it work. And so what Gary did is he told Tim Kask to just toss it in the rules. Now, what you need to understand is that for the longest time, TSR had the big basket of stuff.
I have heard of the big basket of stuff, yes, but for our listeners, viewers who haven't, please tell us about the big basket of stuff, Steve.
There was a big basket of stuff where Gary put things in. And then often he'd hand them to Tim Kask and say, okay, here. And then Tim would try to edit them. And then afterwards, when they're getting ready to publish, Gary would tell them who to put in the credits. So Tim often did not know where the stuff came from, who was connected to what, and you were quite free to ignore the stuff in the big basket of stuff. When I did the expert set, someone gave me some stuff out of the big basket of stuff that was mind-numbingly bad. And I looked at Lauren Schick. I said, do I have to use this? They said, oh, no, you can throw it away. It's just there in case it's useful. And like, okay. Anyway, but that was my encounter with the big basket of stuff, because you just get whatever was around that might be useful. And someone else would hand it to you. But I did the power, and like body hardening was to give, you're supposed to start off with body hardening and your first major power. It's kind of almost like a monk class, except, monks were more useful.
Right.
And then you worked your way up and you developed the various sonic powers that go with Indian mysticism. And the 8 major and then the various minor ones, and they were randomly assigned.
Mm-hmm.
And Tim just got the big basket of stuff, and he said, well, okay. Because Gary thought it'd be neat to have psionics. After all, it was a big chunk of golden age fantasy and science fiction with psionic powers.
Right.
And if you were raised on golden age stuff, of course it was interesting to you.
Yeah.
And they had some neat monsters. So they wanted to give the player something to interact with them. Whereas I was just thinking I was going to do a character class. And, I've been asked about divines, and I said, the way to, if I had done divines, what I'd have done is I'd have had a short single target power, a short area of effect, a long single target power, and a long area of effect. And so, you zap away doing a D6, someone's right there. As you get more powerful, it expands out. And that way you're roughly equivalent to a mage, but different.
Mm-hmm.
You have your psionic defenses would be ones that make you disappear from psionic sight, ones that protect only you, and one protects an area. And they'd have strengths and weaknesses to various kinds of attacks. And that way you could protect your party, protect yourself, and stealth. But I didn't design the psionic attacks and defenses.
Okay.
And they came up with stuff that was modeled after the monster powers. The original character class was,
mm-hmm.
great for monsters, but obviously difficult for characters. And the worst thing for a character was to get low psionic power, and suddenly you were vulnerable and attracting all sorts of monsters who couldn't defend yourself.
Yeah.
So sonics were a bad gamble for most characters.
Right. I mean, and a particularly evil DM, if and I'm sure this, just in case any of our audience is unaware, if you're including psionics in your AD&D campaign, you can also include random psionic encounter tables. And you can fire off the simplest psionic power in the world, like, my mug is across the room. I'll just telekinese it over to me. Well, guess what? That could cause Demogorgon to show up.
Or, brain parasites.
Yeah. Yeah. Suddenly you start getting dumber.
There are all these monsters that, if you don't have a high psionic power and a lot of awareness, they just sneak up on you and eat you.
Mm-hmm.
It's, those random tables were pretty terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I have to relate this. Is this just, it made me smile. My daughter got me hooked on the Avatar: The Last Airbender series, which is it's a fun TV show. And I was like, okay, all right, I'll watch it with you. And I sat down, and like 20 minutes into the thing, I'm like, well, this is just AD&D psionics. This is just a monk who has psionics. That's what this is. And she looked at me and said, what are you even talking about? I said, hang on, let me go get something. And I grabbed a player's handbook, and I was like, look here. He's got telekinesis. He can do this and that.
And the movie was such a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, it really was. We've watched both of the cartoon series, and she said, okay, we're going to watch the movie. And it just, not.
Well, the movie had 3D, but none of the bending powers were displayed in 3D.
Really? I've only seen it on TV, and we don't have a 3D television. So,
but I saw it in the movie theater, and it was like, who cares about the 3D stuff other than the bending?
Yeah.
And the bending's all computer generated stuff. It's like, it would have been perfect for use of 3D. And that would have been dramatic. And instead, the 3D is just, wasted background texture.
No, well, that is a shame. It's not a. If for anyone who's watching, do see Avatar. The you can catch it on streaming. Do watch the sequel to it. But the live action movie, it, like you say, it's a wasted opportunity.
Well, and you got a movie. Who cares about the live action stuff when the special effects? What do I care if a background character is in 3D?
Mm-hmm.
When a blast of fire or wind or something isn't.
Yeah. That should have been what was coming out at you, and it's the people are in 3D and the bending's not.
Fire mission ships come out of the screen at you. Okay, big whoop.
Yeah.
That's like the old 3D movies. There's always a scene where somebody had a spear or something and they're waving it around toward the audience.
Yes, I remember it well. You get the old anaglyphic red and blue graphic glasses on. Yep. Damien says the Earth Kingdom fight was horrid in the live action film. You needed a group of 6 people to move one 10-pound rock. Yeah. Just so many miscues in that. And they actually made fun of it in one of the last episodes of Avatar. They made fun of the live action movie.
That's perfect.
But so that at least now I think we can and anyone harboring any bruised feelings about psionics, it's not Steven's fault, guys. It's Tim Kask's.
Well, it's not Tim Kask's fault either.
Oh, okay.
He did by far the best he could do with what he was given. Can you imagine editing D&D stuff with here? It's like Blackmore, It's like, okay.
Yeah.
The guy's name's on the cover. Found it very difficult to deliver finished product. And so, they kind of freebased it. Plus, they did my underwater encounters.
Yeah. The underwater encounters. And you're the Saugan came out straight into the 1E Monster Manual. The entries are pretty much identical, aren't they?
And then Arneson sued them because he wanted to be paid royalties for my work.
Huh.
Bless his heart. And I never actually got paid for that stuff.
Really?
The deal was if I do this stuff and then they do my manual of the plane stuff.
Uh-huh.
Instead, they just used my stuff, and then they had somebody else assign you the manual of the planes because they had a lot of demand for it. And that poor guy just got assigned it on a lot of assignments people got at TSR, they had short deadlines. And so he did the best he could. And so I never got paid. They used a bunch of my stuff. The only person that ever got paid for it was Dave Arneson, who sued them and said, "Hey, I didn't get paid for that." And
Goodness.
yeah, so he never sent me a cent. He just took money from my work.
Not even $5.
Not even $5. $5 would have bought 2 McDonald's Happy Meals.
Heck yeah. Question from Chris. He says, Steve, did you have any plans for a D&D companion set after finishing the expert set? The BX sets were my intro to D&D and blew me away as a kid. Always wanted a companion set in the same vein.
Yeah, we were going to do one that took you from level 15 to like level 26.
Mm-hmm.
And then that just didn't happen. They had one problem TSR has. They had too many product lines.
Mm.
And that came up later with the settings and such. So they divide their fandom up. But they weren't quite sure what they were going to do with BX. It was going to be BX and then a companion would have. And there is a companion out there. It's just not additional levels and spells and stuff. It's just additional stuff.
Mm.
In fact, give me just a moment. I'll go grab it. I've got a copy.
Okay, go get it. This is, if you're just joining us, folks, TSR alum Steve Marsh is hanging out with us tonight. He's grabbing some TS artifacts, might I say, to show us. That's going to be kind of interesting to see. He'll hove back into view shortly, I assume. We're just waiting on him. Good questions tonight, by the way, guys. Y'all are in rare form this evening. Thumbs up from the Delver to y'all. And I hope everyone's having an absolutely fantastic evening. Ah, here he comes. There's the main. Yeah. Here, you know what? Let me see if I can.
That's Player's Companion Book 1 and Dungeon Master's Companion Book 2.
Oh, that's not it.
And they have they actually go level 15 to 25.
Okay.
So they did. Most people aren't aware that's out there.
You know, B and X were kind of an interesting crossroads, and I remember this always stuck with me. There was a letter I saw in Dragon magazine. It was basically somebody lamenting the lack of basic and expert stuff, and the response, and I'm not sure if it was Kim Mohan at the time or who it was that was responding, but basically they said, well, if you want to see it, submit stuff to us and we'll publish it. And I honestly, there was just never that much BX stuff ever in Dragon magazine, but I wonder if that was the case, if people just weren't, if that one letter writer was the lone banner waver for BX and people just weren't sending stuff in, or what?
Well, part of it is that a lot of people kind of mix stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of mix and match. And a lot of people didn't treat the material as that different. All the tournaments for conventions were all AD&D.
Mm-hmm.
The thought was AD&D would be very specific, very exact, so that if you had 20 people, 200 people playing in a tournament, they would all have the same rules, the same chances, the same results when they, other than the dice rolling, when they went through a scenario or something. And basic and expert were seen as something you can basically take them and make them your own. you consider yourself very free to modify things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you ever read Russ Jerig's series.
No, I have not.
That's his D&D campaign.
Really?
Yes, his Dragarians are his elves. And
Fascinating.
what's really interesting is that the books jump back and forward in time.
Mm-hmm.
There's a timeline, but he's giving you stories out of the timeline. And the world gets more complex as you move down the timeline, not book release. But his Dragarians are lizard people.
Okay.
And they are the immortal elves. Elves don't use psionics because they've got magic, and psionics is a waste of time. The humans do. And you have some psionic. You have one elf character that uses psionics.
Okay.
The dwarves live underground, hate everyone, and they make life-draining weapons. But that's his house rules. The campaign is his house rules. If you hadn't corresponded with him like I did, you wouldn't know reading that that's a D&D campaign. It doesn't look like a D&D campaign. You go, what? But it's his D&D stuff. And the originals approach was everybody expected people to take the rules and make them their own.
Mm-hmm.
But once you start having tournaments and tournament competition at conventions, you need to have rules that were really locked in.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, the amount of fairness you're going to get when you've got multiple dungeon masters and characters and stuff, it's just not going to be the same. You can't get, And so Gary was very specific. AD&D, if you're messing with it, it's not AD&D. But he was looking at specific rules, especially with the tournament goal.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas D&D was, okay, have at it, make changes. And it's easy enough to forget that the companion book actually came out. And I've been quite tempted to do my own version of it, but finding the time, especially as I'm trying to train to get on the PCT, we're going to be doing 20 miles a day.
Yeah, that's, like I said, that's a stretch of the legs.
Yeah, we're training for that. But anyway, so there is really a companion set, book 1 and book 2, one for players, one for DMs. And it actually came out. I keep forgetting that because everybody else has forgotten it. It's edited by Anne Gray. So my guess is she wrote it. Brian Bloom wrote the forewords. And I don't know anything else that Anne Gray did. But she did, fine work on this.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some stuff for Monsters and Other Planes and giant whales. And the indexes are on the back page. But anyway, and I suspect it's out there in PDF somewhere because TSR has been, Wizards of the Coast has been releasing everything in PDF.
Yeah. Some of it print on demand. The lion's share of it on PDF. There's a few rarities out there, from the old tournament mimeographed and handed out at WinterCon in 1976 stuff that they don't have PDFs of, but maybe someday.
But I was not invited by Brian Bloom to participate in any of that, and so there's a lot of it I was not involved with, and
well, I don't want to be accused of blowing sunshine, as it were, but I consider your contributions to the hobby of role playing of much greater importance. Any past history and interference by certain Kevin and Brian of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin aside.
Eventually I'll get $5 for the solid one.
That's right, man. $5. Come on, you guys, pony up. $5 for
Wizards of the Coast owes me $5.
Wizards owes him $5, people. Come on.
Anyway,
Luther,
really enjoyed that. He told them they got a non-exclusive. Oh, neat. Thank you, Luther. I'm glad you enjoyed Age of Saga. I enjoyed writing it. True story about writing it. They wanted me to read all the sagas first. So I sat down and reread all the sagas I hadn't read and everything else. And then the last day, the art department repossessed my desk.
Oh.
Now, God. And my first thought was, well, I'll just go down there and get the desk back. And
okay.
So you can't do that. Why? Are they going to stop me? I'll just kill them. They said, you can't do that. And I said, yeah, I can. I'm a fairly good martial artist. And at the time I was, the kind of guy I grab flies out of the air and, and I'm thinking, they're just artists. And then Tom Mulvey looked at me and said, Steve, you've read too much saga without a break. Your thinking's wrong. He said, I've seen this happen to students when I was teaching college. Just take a breath, sit down, let your mind get back into normal. And, half an hour later, I'm like, what the heck was I thinking? It's like I was just approaching it like one of the characters in a saga. And it's like, no. And of course, obviously, it was like their desk, and they let, we just were using their desk, and when they needed it back, they got it back. And, it's like, it was just like, I just disconnected from reality. And I thought, you really can.
Anyway, he says Saga was drug.
Yeah, Saga was fun to design. I did the map, and it was the first mini game we designed.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned something from the mini games. They had me write up a bunch of pitches, and they picked Saga. Later, I saw one of their games. There's another mini game out there. It's got the same name my pitch had. And I don't have any credit for it, but then I look at the game. And it's obvious that whoever had done the game had never seen my pitch. Because of the design choices and stuff they did, I could tell.
Okay.
And I thought, that's a good lesson to me. Because I look at the name, I look at the back cover, and it's easy enough for me to think, gee, someone swiped my work and I didn't get credit. I should have gotten a line of credit,
Mm.
But then I looked at it and said, there's no way anybody saw my treatment and designed this game, because they just didn't take any of the sort of direction that you would have gotten. It would have contaminated their design work. Well, maybe not contaminated, but would have affected their design work, and there's no trace of that. And there's a lot of stuff in the game industry that happens like that.
Mm-hmm.
Where, 20, 30, 100 people have the same pieces of a idea. It's like I met some poor guy. He was certain that George Lucas had stolen Star Wars from him. Yeah. Warrior monks with psionic powers. Okay. In the future. like 10, 12 Golden Age novels like that at least.
Yeah.
But he didn't understand structure enough to tell that his idea had nothing to do with Lucas, not to mention Lucas had no way of having connected with him. And there's just a lot of stuff out there where it's easy enough to think someone swiped your stuff, but they really didn't.
Well, I mean, you know, really, I mean, Star Wars is the retelling of the heroic myth cycle, right?
Yeah, I mean, Lucas was a big fan
the
of
hero's journey.
And not only that, but the original Star Wars story was Luke's supposed to fight with the king of the Wookiees, beat him in single combat, and then lead the Wookiees against the evil empire.
I hadn't heard that particular treatment, but that sounds entirely plausible.
That's part of the original treatment. And you can tell that by the time they got to what they actually got in the movie, well, I don't recall seeing any climatic duel with the king of the Wookiees. And the Wookiees are not part of overcoming the evil empire other than a co-pilot. It's just like the original one other in Star Wars was Nova. And she doesn't make it into any of the movies. She makes it in the comic book.
Okay.
And if you've ever seen SBI's Freedom in the Galaxy.
I know the title. I've never seen the game.
The game is modeled off of the original Star Wars universe. Down to the evil emperor being a puppet. And a bunch of other stuff. Some of which shows up in the comic strip. And some of it shows up in the comic books. But you know what? It just didn't make it into the movies.
Just didn't make it into the movies. That, you were talking about mini games and we're mentioning Star Wars. I did a video for Patreon users a couple of weeks ago where I talked about the TSR mini game Attack Force.
Yes.
Which is the attack on the Death Star.
Yes.
With the serial numbers filed off. But then what is the attack on the Death Star? It's the Dam Busters with the serial numbers filed off, which was an actual historical event.
Yeah. Or they invaded Pleasantville, which is fighting off the invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah. Yep. So it's all cyclical, folks.
Yeah. And so some of the stuff is things with some of the serial numbers filed off, not all of them even.
Yeah, well.
And sometimes it's, you know what? It has no relationship at all. And somebody had a question that popped up and went away.
Oh, sorry. I misclicked, but I think it's
yes, it would have been. That's a good insight.
Yeah. Star Wars is the Hidden Fortress by Akira Kurosawa. Now, this is you and this is your time, so I'm not going to go off on this rant, but I have a great conspiracy theory about how Star Wars is actually a biopic about George Lucas up until he finishes American Graffiti. But that's another discussion for another time. It's practically a one-to-one matchup, and I'll bore people with it some other time. But no, Star Wars is the Hidden Fortress plus the Dam Busters with a little bit of, or rather, I should say, a whole lot of some Buster Crabbe, Flash Gordon thrown in,
and a brief clip from Triumph of the Will.
Yes, the medal awarding ceremony at the end, where with all of the and not just that, but when actually I think it's in the third movie, but there's a scene when Vader is walking through a hangar and there's these stormtroopers all arrayed around him in these perfect rows that has a very Leni Riefenstahl look to it.
Yeah. And then the second movie, The Empire Strikes Back, at the end of it, they were in contract negotiations, and they weren't sure who they would have available for the next movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so the end of the second movie is a cliffhanger designed to let them deal with one or none of the characters other than the Muppets.
Yep.
So that they can just start off with Nova and none of the actors from the last movie. Nova and a Muppet.
I remember, Washington. Of course, I remember I was having this discussion earlier today. When I was a kid, I read Star Wars comics, and in between Empire and Jedi, which when you're 10 years old, 11 years old, the 3-year span between those movies was an eternity.
Yeah.
It was an eternity to me. And I remember somebody wrote in and they gave this guy like multiple column inches in the letters section, the mailbag section of Star Wars, when he was like, look, I know how the third movie, Star Wars 3, is going to work out. And he was confident that Han Solo would not be back because the special effects didn't exist to show the carbonite going away. That just wouldn't work. That Luke would follow Darth Vader, that Luke would become evil, and that Boba Fett would teach Leia how to be a Jedi and fight and defeat Luke at the end of it. And when I was, again, 10, 11 years old, so, oh my God, what if this guy's got it right? What if he really does have all this insider information? But it could have happened. It could have happened.
Because they weren't really sure what they're going to do.
Exactly. I mean, George had to write in the bit with Luke getting smacked in the face by the Wampa because Mark Hamill was in a car wreck and wrapped his face on the steering wheel of his car and went from boyish good looks to, not so boyish good looks. So they had to
pardon me. I've got some allergies.
Put that in. It's allergy season. I understand. So what have you got in the publishing pipeline? What can we grab from Steve Marsh right now?
There's a little bit at New Big Dragon. I think they've got some stuff from the Plane of Shadows, the rough draft. It was a pre-production stuff that was done. Otherwise, it's a matter of when Richard finishes up the editing and when it's in the publisher's schedule. And
yeah, I just put the URL there.
He has some great material for BX. And he's a wonderful editor. He had some life delays, and he's like, Steve, I can give it all back to you. I was like, no, I'll just wait on you. Quite frankly, I'd rather wait on you than get it back and get it published faster, because I'd rather have better quality.
Right on.
And, I've had bad editors and I've had good editors. And I'd rather have a good editor and wait. It's not like I need the money. I'll eventually get $5.
Yeah, exactly. $5. Well, as soon as I see something pop up on New Big Dragon here, and I can purchase in the sense that I'd be sitting here doing e-buying while I'm trying to talk to my guests, but I'll send you $5. It's worth at least $5, right? But so you got that going on, and as you say, you're going to NTRPG. We had a comment earlier from one of our commenters. We're doing a little show. I promised my audience that if we got to 1,000 or more subscribers on YouTube, I would do a virtual convention, a virtual tabletop convention.
Oh, neat.
Thank you very much, James Keck, for the super chat. I appreciate that, bud. So we're doing that, and I got to scroll back. I know somebody made this comment earlier for you. Adam Black said that you were invited to his. Here we go. He is officially invited to my basic expert game at the Great Underground Online Gaming Convention.
Okay.
The Guac, as we call it. So later this month, if you want to come and do some virtual gaming, we've got you've got an invite there, and I can send you the link if you want to check that out.
Unfortunately, right now, I've got to finish up two. I've got one of the modules completed. I need two more. I need complete.
Sure.
And I'm embarrassed, but I got delayed by tossing the plane of fire in, where it's not otherwise relevant, other than it's kind of germane. And pardon me. I'm trying to hike at least 5-6 hours a day right now.
Right on.
And I got 2,400 feet of elevation today and 12 miles, and we're going to do 3-4 miles tonight.
That's excellent, man. That's awesome. Well, if it's a big hit, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Are there any other questions anyone has?
I'll scroll up through. Let's see. James with a super chat for 20. If you got anything, James, call the ball. It's let's see. I think Luther, as a creator of stuff myself, and you're going to definitely agree with this statement. Good writers borrow, great writers steal. Let's see. Kind of going through here. Companion set. There's Luther commenting about Saga earlier. Let me just double check my my notes here. I don't want to leave anybody off if they've got a question. I believe that just about answers everybody's questions, unless one has popped up here at the bottom at the end.
Well, thank you for having me on, Bill.
Adam Black says, thank you for BX. Would have gotten into illustration and comics. I owe Mr. Marsh $5 too. I think we'll close out with this one. Awig asks, what type of law? What's your lawyer in?
Okay. First, I'm retired. But on and off, I handled public sector law from 1985 to 2019. It's 2019. That's civil rights and related stuff. I did some plaintiff's work. I did some general practice. In the last 17 years, I did defense work. I did a bunch of specialty stuff, which was fun. So I did public sector. I did products liability. I was part of a special task force. I did some fire. I did what they call maritime limitation of loss cases, which shortened up to LOL. I did commercial lines defense work of all sorts of stuff, including what's called bond. There's a few. It's a narrow area, but I had a lot of fun. And then I retired. I tried, 2 copyright cases to verdict. I guess 3 to verdict. 2 of them I was defending. The plaintiffs recovered nothing. In the one case, the judge told me, I know you're entitled to attorney's fees, Steve, but if you want them, you're going to have to appeal. Anyway, and I agreed with the judge. And then the law firm I was part of also beat 7-Eleven on their own trademark.
Interesting.
Hey, they were on notice. Anyway, and the best part was we were willing to settle if they just paid to replace the sign.
Huh.
And then when they lost, they were kind of responsible for the sign, which is why they lost. When they lost, the court, of course, assessed attorney's fees against them. And then that's when the corporate people discovered that the attorney's fees and the cost to replace the sign after they lost came to $15,000. And their lawyers had charged them in the six figures.
Wow.
To lose. The case of the loser by summary judgment from day one. Which was a good education for everybody involved.
Yeah, I can believe it.
Because, they could have just paid $3,000 up front, replaced the sign. And everybody would have been happy. And bless their hearts, their lawyers talked them into spending a little bit more money.
That is one thing that passes beyond my understanding why stuff like that happens. And I've heard so much.
I hope that kind of explains the kind of law I did.
I did. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I also got appointed by judges I had to represent some criminal cases, including a guy I didn't even live in the same county. I had a reputation for being very patient. And anyway.
Well, you put up with me for 2 hours, so clearly you've got the patience thing is down bad.
I did too well, and they decided never to stick a case on me again.
We'll take one more question from Luther, just because he's a gadfly here on the channel. Yeah. He says, "Ever think of making a Saga second edition? I bought the first one. Well, my mom did, and will gladly buy the second."
I don't have the rights.
Yeah, that would lie with Wizards of the Coast, I would think.
Yeah. But I appreciate, I had somebody else contact me, see if I had the rights, if I could authorize them. It was like, sorry. Contact Wizards.
Maybe they'll let it go for $5. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much. Will you come back?
Sure.
Great. Love to have you back sometime soon. I want to thank everybody out there watching for some great questions. I want to thank you, Steve. Thank you so much for being here. It was a blast having you here.
My pleasure.
And thank you for finally telling us how to pronounce Sogan and Ixtchitl.
Sogwin's got two pronunciations. Sogwin is the Hogwin, and Ixtchitl, only 4 syllables. Just like the card will tell you, there are only 4 lights.
There you go.
You have a great evening.
You too, Steve. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Good night. All right. Steve Marsh, everybody. And that was loads of fun. I want to take a quick minute before I dip out myself here. And I want to thank all of our donators. Thanks again to our super chats tonight. I really appreciate that. You guys help keep the lights on, literally. So thank you to Joshua Garlock, Lord Corian, Ricky Maru, Mobius, Kevin Reynolds, Doomsword Deathmaster, Mark Simpson, Damian X247, James F. Keck, William Smith, The Dungeon Minister, Manny Wall, Mark Corey, Kevin Wood, Todd Sharp, Carnivore Farmer, Can't Say That I'll Get Bandulous, Jeremy Rule, Boganora, Mikey Mank, and Sky Hernstrom. You guys were awesome. Thank you all for being here. Luther, you're quite welcome. I just love to bring that kind of stuff to you guys. Tomorrow night, I will be back. We will do a little chit chat beforehand, and then we're going to play some Gamma World. And then on Saturday, I don't care what you guys do. I won't be here. You just have a camera looking at a bare wall. Why would you come here? I won't be here Saturday. But Monday, I'll be back. And then we'll just have a nice open game. Tuesday, of course, Tuesday night, AD&D live stream. If you're a newcomer to the channel, we live stream Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition every Tuesday night for 2 hours. Wednesday evening will be Waster Wednesday. Kyle will be back and we'll find something to talk about. I know we will. And then next Thursday, John Popson of Effin' Cool Minis will be here. You guys will want to talk about what the latest thing going on in minis with Effin' Cool is, because they do effing cool stuff. And then on Friday, we'll wrap up the week with some more Gamma World. So until then, until tomorrow, everyone, be good to each other. And thank you all again. Have a great evening.